And we're live. It's a Wednesday afternoon. It's just past 2:30 p.m. We're a bit late, but it's so much going on here at KTH Innovation. Techniking in one, live from Stockholm, Sweden. Donny with your Innovation Fika. Every Wednesday, 2:30 p.m., your innovation coffee break with something super interesting. Always a super interesting person, always a super interesting subject, and of course, an incredibly interesting discussion. Today, we've managed to double the audience from last week, so I'm really happy to see the crowds building up here at Techniking in One. It's amazing. My name is Donny. I do this every Wednesday, 2:30 p.m. Apart from that, I post almost daily on LinkedIn and Instagram about innovation, startups, entrepreneurship, and similar stuff. I've also started posting the same things, but on video format on TikTok. So if you want to follow me there, do that as well. Donny S. Siligonis on all channels. Follow me there, and all content on Medium. All of my now 390 posts in one go on Medium as well. So check that out. But enough about me, enough about that. We are here today to talk to from Green Room, where he's sitting with all the other celebrities, of course, Mr. Gustav Notander.
Thank you, Donny.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I look so very short in this picture, and you look so very tall. Maybe I should do the Sylvester Stallone thing and actually stand on a telephone book. He did that in the Rocky films. He actually stood on the box, so he looked as tall as the people he was fighting.
Or maybe have special shoes.
I could have elevator shoes, like they had in the Elton John and the guys had in the 70s. That would be cool. And maybe we could do something like that, and I can sort of adjust myself depending on who I'm meeting. That would be kind of cool. Anyway, welcome, Gustav Notander. Today we're going to talk about. Let me do this and add Mr. Gustav Notander here, business development coach at KTH Innovation. You're my colleague here at KTH, but not everybody knows that out there. So in short, who are you and what do you do at KTH Innovation?
Okay. So my name is Gustav Notander. I'm one of the business coaches at KTH Innovation, colleague of yours, as you said. I've been working here since we started KTH Innovation in its current form back in 2007. So it's been a couple of years. I was actually the first employee when we started. So it was our head of department, Lisa, and then I was hired as
You were like the intern at 15 years of age or something like that.
Yeah. Something like that. No, but then I'm basically working with helping the students and researchers and other staff to commercialize their research results and develop business ideas. And it's all about the hands-on practical day-to-day support that we can give them, just like yourself.
Just like myself. Yeah. But you've also spent a lot of time with the infrastructure and the tools and the templates and things that actually is the support of KTH Innovation. Because I often get the question, how not only how is Sweden so innovative, but how do you manage to have such a high deal flow at KTH Innovation because you work with so many cases? And I always say it's infrastructure, it's structure that actually enables us to work with many cases. And you are one of the minds behind that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Coming in as the first one and all of us who were at the very beginning, we realized right off the bat that we will have to build a process around this. We will have to create a way of working where we can deal with a lot of ideas, because obviously we know KTH, big technical university, lots of people with different types of ideas, and they're coming to us. And it doesn't work for us to either be sort of very much of a gatekeeper saying, yes, we believe in this and not that, and we're only going to work with you and focus a lot of effort. So that doesn't create the kind of innovative and entrepreneurial environment and culture that we want at KTH. So it's been more about building a process, building toolbox, building ways of working where we can support a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas so they can try it, so they can come out. And I always say, our job is to help them do the right thing at the right time and have the right resources to do it. And to be able to do that effectively, then you need to have process, you need to have frameworks to work with it.
The interesting thing I think is as well that when we're going to talk about the actual one tool today, we're going to talk about the readiness level tool today, which I know that many people out there are really curious about. But the interesting thing is that the later years, there's been a lot of talk about digitalization. of processes and things. And the interesting thing is when people talk about how to digitalize your company, they always say, you have to identify and then use digital tools to automate the things that should be automated, because that frees up time for you as a person to do more of what the person should be doing. Because often people are doing too much of the mundane, repetitive stuff. And the interesting thing is that that's the way we've been thinking from the start, without maybe, we've done a lot of value mapping and things like that. I know that, but it's a really interesting way of thinking that you need a good structure to be able to improvise and to be able to actually, to be able to work with what you're supposed to be doing. And I'll just put another address on here for the people as well, the KTH Innovation Readiness Level.com, which is actually the website, because we've actually published this tool now.
Yes, I mean, this is one, and I'll show you. Donny was laughing at me earlier because he thought
digitalization.
Exactly, digitalization. So I brought
the printer.
Papers. But this is the printout version of what you find on that website. What was I going to say? It was something about the structure. Yeah. So, but having, I think coming back to what I said before about trying to be able to deal with a lot of cases and doing the right thing at the right time. For us as coaches, it helps so much when you have a framework that you can hold on to. Frees up mental bandwidth. It helps you to focus on how to do things, not trying to figure out what to do. The what and the roadmap is kind of there. So then instead we can look at each particular case. We don't have to spend time on generic things. That's sort of already taken care of with our toolbox, with our processes, with this particular model. And then instead we can look at each case and see, okay, so you're here, you need to get there. What's holding you back? How can we support you to get there? And I think that's what we built, as you say, from the beginning, kind of, it's been a natural part of how we built this.
But let's go back to the beginning. How did it start? How do we get in? Because today, this is actually in a startup perspective. It's like, oh, look at this. It's an incredible thing. It's just sort of, they just put together 6 things and they put it, and they just publish it and everything works fantastically. But I know that we have put an enormous amount of work into this. But how did it all start?
So the backstory of this particular framework started in, I think it was 2009, could be early 2010, but I think it was 2009, when a colleague and I, we went over to Silicon Valley on a typical study tour that you do there if you're working in the field we're working, and listening to lots of presentations. In one of them, we heard someone from an incubator or accelerator talk about this thing called the Technology Readiness Level. Which is the kind of the original scale of how to measure technology development from just a first insight or an idea to something that is ready and implemented and fully functional. It comes from NASA, the American Space Agency, and they've been using it since the 60s or 70s or something like that. Basically, long story short, we heard that, we looked at each other and said, that sounds like a really useful tool for us, because we are in the situation all the time when we have a student or researcher coming to us. You sit in the first meeting, you talk about the idea, and then you come to the question, so how far have you come in the development? And then you get some story around, we have a prototype, we've been working on this for 10 years, blah, blah, blah. But it's still really hard to kind of match what they're saying with what I'm hearing and understanding. So we thought, why not have this scale from 1 to 9 with clear definitions? We put it on the table. We can just, point the finger. If you look at this scale, where are you now? And then that takes 1 minute, 2 minutes. You sit there and like, oh, yeah, but actually we're on level 3. Okay, fine, perfect. Then the conversation from there on is so much easier. You know where you're at, and you can start talking about how do you move further. So it started with TRL. Then after using that for a while, we realized very useful tool, very useful in our coaching, very useful for the cases, for the people with ideas. But technology is not the only area that we talk about. There are lots of things you need to work with. So the other obvious question that we always have is, so who's your customer? Like, how do you know? How have you talked to anyone about this? And again, kind of a pedagogical challenge of figuring out. So we thought, why don't we make in the same format, why don't we make a scale called Customer Readiness Level, where it's all about figuring out from sort of you having maybe no idea of who the customer is, all the way from understanding your customer, getting your stuff in the hands of your customer, to actually selling and having real sales. And that was sort of where it started. And then over the years, we've been kind of looking at all the areas that we feel are the most important ones. We're at 6 sort of dimensions, or 6 different areas that we're focusing on right now. And over time, over these last 12 or so years, 11, 12 years, we've built and refined this. So we have sort of scales that are analogous to TRL from 1 to 9. 1 is sort of, it's just an idea, you don't really know much about it. 9, it's out there, fully implemented on the market with clear definitions in between, and it helps us to know how far have you come in the development, and that informs us about what's the reasonable next step.
And I think so it started as a NASA tool back in the 60s. Distributed teams all over the US trying to build rockets, and they needed something to sync where they were and how far they'd come. Where, as you said, number 1 was, we have an idea for a rocket, and number 9 was, the rocket's on its way to the moon, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, inspired by that, you built it into a multi-dimensional model that has, so it's technology, customer,
business readiness, intellectual property, team, and funding.
Yeah. So those different ones, and it's interesting because it's I've been a big part of developing it as well, and I mean, I come from the software side, and when we're talking about both tech, but also tech and intellectual property, I know we've had a big process of adapting it to software as well. So today the model works equally well for hardware as for software, which I think is really, really cool. And another question to you then is, okay, there's a scale from 1 to 9 in these different dimensions, but how long do we work with cases? I mean, how long are they here at KTH? Because we're very early. We started, yes. I mean, I'm going to say pre-1, but 1.
Yeah. And actually, having a way of measuring this helps us define how long they should be with us, because otherwise it's sort of a little bit of a moving target. And especially if you have a pet project, you want to hang on to it, you want to sort of, I want to follow this, but we have a very clear mission, or we have a very clear assignment of working the early stages, pre-commercial phase, and that's what we do. So on these scales, we've been able to say that we typically work with cases until they are somewhere up to maybe level 4 or 5. When they're getting beyond that, sure, there are cases that are beyond that in 1 or 2 levels, but as a general rule of thumb, that's sort of where they would start being ready to move from our type of support to something else.
Yeah. Personally, one of my favorite uses for this, I mean, I could say, these 5. No, but I'd say, first of all, it's an incredible way of speaking about something that is very abstract in a very concrete way. Yeah. Because you say, how far have you come? And tech, you could probably say, we've uploaded an app, or we've built a prototype. But when we're talking about customer and contacts and business readiness, it becomes very, very sort of intangible. Yeah. And this is a perfect way for me as a business coach to have a discussion. And as you said, in a meeting, within a minute, with a finger on a scale, you can actually have a discussion on where are you now, and even more importantly, where are you going, and what would the next step be to get there. Yeah. So it's a very progressive.
It's a very powerful coaching tool. If you look at coaching, the coaching process in general, it is very much about understanding where you are now and figuring out what to do next, and then working with sort of how do you get there. Yeah. And this saves a ton of time when you're in that process. So it's a really useful tool in sort of our professional life as coaches. We also see that a lot of our teams, they adopt this internally and use it for their own internal project planning and so on. But what's really interesting, coming back to the point of where they are when we stop our support, is that we're also seeing this being used in sort of innovation ecosystems, where you try to align. So you have someone, university is working with the earliest stages, and then you have some incubator working there, and you have a science park, and sometimes it can be a little bit almost competition between them but the good projects, or where should they go? We have examples of other places in Sweden where they've sat down these different players around these scales and say, okay, you guys, you focus on from level 1 to 4, You guys focus from 4 to 7, and when they're at 7, then they're ready to go to your place.
Yeah.
So it has many different dimensions.
Which is equally interesting because, again, when people ask me about Sweden when I'm traveling the world, one thing I also say is that, okay, of course we're not perfect. There's so many things that we could do better, but there is a chain of events.
Yeah.
You know, there's a very super early stage, and then there's the next stage and the next stage. And we kind of work in different, you know, the links of the chain. And this is one part, because we are not alone using this today, are we? How many others out there actually use this tool today?
That's a very good question. But I think the last time I checked was around 3 weeks ago.
Yep.
And then, because as you said, just to backtrack a little bit, this model is available on a website, KTHinnovationReadinessLevel.com, which you see on the screen. And there you can just register. It's available on a Creative Commons license, but you register and then you get access to the page where you can download it. And out of the people, about 3 weeks ago, we had around 650 individuals who had registered, and they were representing roughly 550 organizations all around the world, all continents, all types of organizations. We have obviously universities, people like ourselves, incubators, accelerators. We have investors. We have startup companies. We have big companies with internal R&D work where they want to use this also in their work. So it's actually spread quite a lot, I would say.
And as any other framework, it benefits from more people using it, because the more people that use the same wording and the same scales and the same measurements, the easier it is for people to interact and work together.
Yes. That's where the communication, I mean, this whole model has two main functions. One is communication. It makes it easier to communicate around how far have you come in the development of your idea. The other one is to help in kind of planning and setting roadmaps and developing. But for the communication part, of course, the more people that have this as a point of reference, the easier it is to communicate around it. Interestingly enough, here in Sweden, it's even been picked up by public authorities like the innovation agency Vinnova. They've started using this, not all the scales, but some of the scales in the reporting in the national incubation program. So all the incubators have to report back to Vinnova how where their companies are that they are supporting, where they are on some of these different innovation readiness levels. So it's one example of how this also can become a tool.
Another favorite use I have with it as well is that we have, and this is a later adaptation, not adaptation, but a later sort of evolution for us as well, is that we've worked it into all of the application stages for like funding and grants. So we ask the potential startups to say, we need money to do this, which will move us from this level to this level, which from the start will teach people to understand that, okay, if I'm asking for money and if I can express what it's going to help me do, I have a much higher chance of getting that funding. And I really like that part of it, that we tie it so closely to, performance and execution and doing stuff.
Yeah. But I think one of the good things, and I know this from talking to a lot of people who have been interested in this framework, one of the things that's really good is the flexibility. You can use it in lots of different ways. You can use it as the simple, the paper on the table and you point the finger in the meeting. You can use it the way you described that we have, integrating it into funding applications and so on. You could use it, we've done it in some programs that we've run where you have it as sort of almost like portfolio monitoring, looking in a portfolio of different projects, mapping, visualizing, because I don't know if you see, I'll put up my paper again. If you can see this, it's a radar diagram, it's a radar chart with these different dimensions that are plotted. And then you can see how different companies or different projects compare to each other. You can follow progress over time. So there's a lot of different ways and there's a lot of flexibility. And I think that's also why it's a useful framework.
And for a startup, even though they're detached from an incubator or not at a place or I don't have a coach, for a startup, it's a great tool to create alignment in the team when a tech person is speaking to a marketing person, and vice versa, customer to tech and tech to customer. Perfect. Yesterday, today is December 8th. Yes.
Yes.
And last night we had a launch here of one of my teams, Protendering. They came here and opened the, of course, alcohol-free champagne. Of course, because they wanted to celebrate that they launched their product and also got their first customer. And they explicitly said that without the readiness level tool, they would never have gotten to where they are as quickly, because they managed to see, everything that had to be done, and they were sort of like checking everything and progressing forward. And they could also see what wasn't being done, and they had to sort of, pick up and bring forward. So that was a really nice thing to hear. I mean, I can stand here and say it's a great thing, but it's always nice to hear other people say that it was useful for them and it's helped them in their development.
But one thing, or one or two things that I think to build on that, is that it's also when people are using it, and when a lot of people are using it, that it kind of creates also feedback, and it helps develop the tool, because this is not static. It's been developed all the time. I think many of the skills that we have right now in the version that's online, they're sort of the fourth or fifth iteration, where you're tweaking words, you're looking at all of this all the time. Now we are working on an updated version where we're going to also get a little bit more kind of explicitly about sustainability issues coming in here in the business model and so on.
Yeah.
So I mean, that is happening all the time. And the other thing that I want to point out is that what's written in this, that it's not something that we've just come up with at KTH Innovation. It's not just what I happen to think is cool, or you. We've tried to synthesize, of course, all our experiences, but also the best practices in innovation management, and startups, and all of that.
I mean, this is a typical example of, when you hear somebody that's created a model of anything from leadership or management or anything, and you go, oh yes, of course, that's the way it is. I recognize that, because it's not something they've just packaged something which already is there in a very easy, accessible way. And I'd say, as you say, it's synthesizing best practice of innovation management in a tool that anybody can take up and use at any time. And I'd say one last fun thing, I'll just add that as well. I went to visit NASA, was it like 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah.
And then they said, we heard you've done some really cool things with our TRL. We need to see this tool. So actually, it was like full circle where we came back to NASA, and then we showed them our development of the original tool that they'd done in the 60s. I'm looking at the time here. It's getting close to the end of the coffee break. This is just a short coffee break chat. But Gustav, as all guests, always leave us with their top 3 tips. So this is Gustav's top 3 tips to how to start working, not only with the tool, but in general, working with frameworks, but this tool in mind especially, with tip number 1 being visualize your progress.
Should I elaborate?
Please elaborate on that.
Yes. I think it's truly underestimated. One of the feedbacks that we get on this model is that, it looks nice. It's visual. Don't underestimate that. If you can visualize progress in some way, here it's on scale, thermometers, you could visualize it however you want. But it helps, it motivates, it do it.
Yeah, and it's like a financial slide where you have a roadmap.
Yeah.
We've done this. We're here. We're going there. We need this to achieve that, and so you see what's. So visualize your progress. It not only looks nice, it's very practical as well, and it helps you communicate. Tip number 2: structure frees up bandwidth.
Yes, it's what we talked about before. When you don't have to stop all the time and think, what's the next step? What's the next step? Then you can instead focus on how do I get there? Because that's really the hard part. So wasting time on just trying to, what is a reasonable next step? Well, if you have some way of taking a shortcut there and okay, so this is a reasonable next step, fine. Now, how do we get there?
And that is another thing. People we work with are really smart people. It's not that, it's just that they don't know what to do. What is the next step? And this is one way of just saying, well, here's a framework, follow these steps, and exactly. And then with the framework, you can think more about the how. So, and of course, then tip number 3, all dimensions are important.
Very dynamic way of finishing it up, isn't it? No, I mean, the 6 dimensions that we have included here, they're not there just for random reasons. It is because they are important, and they are all important, and they are all intertwined. They are, you can advance on them individually, but at some point, you need a certain team to be able to do certain things on technology development or customer readiness. You need certain things to be in place for you to be able to advance with funding and so on. So they are important and they are interrelated. And it's easy for people who are very focused on one of them to forget that. We work at a technical university. Here, a lot of people are focused on the technology, and a lot of the researchers maybe also are focused on intellectual property if they think that something can be patented. If you come from a business school, maybe you focus on the customer and the business model and just think, well, technology, that always solves itself. But everything is important, and it is intertwined. So I think that's also an important lesson to take with you.
But I think all of these tips are also good, generic, solid tips for anybody that's running a project to understand that, with visualization comes communication and understanding. With a good structure, you can actually focus on more on how to do things and not have to think of what am I supposed to be doing. And then, of course, make sure that you have, the full picture. You talk about, I need the big picture, I need a helicopter perspective and things like that. Well, that is what it is.
But
go ahead.
The final thing on the last one there, but understanding that all dimensions are important doesn't mean that you don't have to focus. At any given time, you focus on something.
Of course.
But you can take a step back and you can realize that it's all important and you don't lose track of it.
Well, you can't focus on anything without knowing what you're supposed to be focusing on.
Exactly.
So the trees and the forest and not seeing them for each other and that whole thing. Right. Gustav Notander, thank you so much for joining the Innovation Fika. We'll just put this on again. KTH Innovation Readiness Level.com. Go to the website address, sign up, check out the tool, send us your feedback. It's a dynamic, evolving tool. Right now, as you said, we're working a lot more with sustainability, which wasn't sort of on the table 10 years ago in the same way. So that's going to be there in the next iteration. Yeah. Feedback, use it, help us build a tool for the global innovation support. Thank you, Gustav.
Thank you, Donny.
And thank you, everybody out there. And see you next week, 2:30 p.m., Wednesday afternoon, Innovation Fika. Bye for now.